Welcome to Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, brought to you by Byrne Production Services. Here, we explore the different ways business events can bring value to your organization, the latest technological advances in the event space, as well as providing you with actionable strategies to make a business event a success. Let's create an exceptional event experience.
Welcome to another episode of Production Value Matters, the Business Events Podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Ryanne Rask to the show. Ryanne is a dynamic event professional and a leader in the events industry, currently serving as the Director of Events and Experiential Marketing for ProducePay. With a proven track record in event management, her expertise spans strategic event planning, vendor management, innovative experiential events, and techniques. Welcome to the show, Ryanne.
Thank you, Matthew. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So how did you get to where you are today? Can you take me a little bit through your career so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually started out thinking that I wanted to be a chef. So I went to culinary school, which is just like a very creative outlet for me. Cooking has always been kind of like a therapeutic thing in my life. So I wanted to make a career out of it. It's one of my passions. I started cooking in hotels when I was still in college, and I quickly got thrown into the mix in the banquet and catering department. And I just really loved being able to talk to people and interact with people during events, and just get like a behind the scenes view of what's going on. How did they pull this, elaborate banquet off or a wedding off or something like that? So I enjoyed having that view, and I tried to really get as much experience as possible on the back end of the house and try and learn as much as I could about hotels and negotiating, contract negotiations. From there, I got into citywide conventions and learning all about that. So like the big events like Comic-Con, my job was to contract hotels for those large citywide events and learn all about those different facets of conventions. And then from there, I hopped around and I jumped into tech. So I worked for a construction technology company doing events and marketing. I learned so much about actual marketing and, the different touch points and what it takes to kind of pull off event and get your audience engaged with you before an event. And then from there, I jumped into produce. So I worked for a company called Appeal. That's actually helping to extend the shelf life of vegetables and fruits, fresh produce, so stopping waste. And I found that to be very impactful. It's so fun when you get to work for a brand that has, an impactful mission and vision of the company. You feel like, you really want to get behind that and support that. And plus, like anytime the branding is fun and colorful and funky, like it makes my job on the event side a lot easier. And then I got into ProducePay after my time at Appeal, and this has been just such a great experience. It's different. It's definitely different. I get to work in Latin America quite a bit. I get to go places that I never thought I would go, and I'm doing events that I never thought I would do. So it's really kind of pushed me to my limits, but in the best way possible. And really helped me to kind of take a risk. So
that's great. So on the episode today, we're talking about career pivots. And so can you highlight some of those pivotal moments that led you to your position now? Like what were those sort of key linchpin moments? And I wonder if you can delve into that a little bit.
Sure. I mean, I think working in hospitality, I worked in hospitality, like on the back end of the house for so long. And I was actually kind of scared to leave that and kind of take a leap and be on the more customer facing and administrative side of events. So when I jumped from being back of the house and cooking to my job at On Peak with the convention services company, it wasn't anything that I was used to, and I wasn't sure that I could do it, but I tried it and I liked it, and I applied the skills that I learned from, cooking and being in the kitchen and talking to people on the back end. And I applied that to my work, and I was able to kind of get comfortable in that space and keep going and learn new things. And I think that's the most important thing, is to be able to keep your knowledge going and keep your quest for learning as strong as possible, and just diversifying your experience, because that's what sets you apart from everybody else. Is, if you have all these unique experiences, you're kind of like a jack of all trades, and you can do several different things and be valuable in different moments, and show other people how to do those things. So I would say jumping from hospitality into like the tech side or the customer service side of things, it was scary, but it definitely was a pivotal moment, and that's where I really felt the acceleration to really get into different tech companies and to try out different experiences in that, and to learn as much as I could about those companies and what they were doing and how I could translate events and experiences into the marketing channel for each of those companies.
Yeah, it's interesting that you sort of brought up you said a couple of times in that description that being scared or having an apprehensive feeling. And I think that there are a lot of event professionals, either through force of macroeconomic factors like pandemics and the industry changing, we've all in this industry had to pivot a little bit, and that has been a very scary moment. I also think on the flip side that a lot of event professionals know that they can, or like sort of instinctually, deep down inside, they know that they could or would want to pivot into something interesting and new after being in a position for a long time. I think I make a joke with a fellow business owner, friend, that like, look, I run a company, I could be a CEO of something, but geez, like the idea of going off and doing that for something not in the events industry, it just seems so foreign and scary. Yeah. So what do you think is the most critical skill an event professional needs to develop to successfully pivot to, say, a higher role or a different niche in the industry?
I think we kind of touched on that. It's just having a sense of fearlessness and diversifying your experiences. And when I jumped from being a senior manager of events, like I had been doing that for I think like 5 years between 2 different companies, and in my mind I was like, okay, the next step for me is going to be a senior manager or something similar to that. And then I jumped from senior manager all the way up to director when I got over to ProducePay. And I had a moment where I was like, oh my God, can I do this job? Am I qualified to do this job? You experience a little bit of imposter syndrome, but I think once you're thrown into that and you really kind of trust yourself and have that sense of fearlessness, like you can accomplish anything. Like pull from your skills from your previous lives experiences and just apply what you know. And like working in tech is great because there's no blueprint to, how to do things. A lot of people are in the same position of figuring things out and, trial and error and whatnot. But you also have a lot of really experienced people that, bring those diverse experiences to the table and can help you figure that out. So I think it also has a lot to do with the people you surround yourself with and the network that you're building. And, that goes for inside the company and outside the company as well.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you mentioned sort of imposter syndrome, which I think a lot of people in our industry experience. And I'm going to share a statistic that came out on a most recent episode. We were in GDP Connections and speaking to the CEO of GDP. One interesting fact that I'm not sure if you're aware of, that I'm going to try to get the numbers right here, that say women in the industry represent 70% of the industry, but women in leadership in this industry only represent 16% of leadership positions. And so there's a massive gap there. And when we sort of poked at it, we spoke about how there's that imposter syndrome, right? Or and certainly a sense that within the industry, like we're all marketers, we're all sales professionals, we're all leadership professionals. We deal with high risk management projects, and there is this sort of misperception that, and we talk about it as the seat at the table, right? That event professionals are sometimes not invited to that table, even though we're handling all of these big things. So when we were talking about a pivot to go to like a higher role or a shift within a niche, I wonder what is the barrier to that event professional in translating and trusting in themselves to go to work through that fear, and what your sort of thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with understanding the company that you work for, your key stakeholders, and being able to relate to them. Like that's the most rewarding part to me personally of working in events, is the whole human connection and being able to meet so many different people and relate to them on different levels. It's great to see people in this environment because you get to learn so much about them. But when you're at the table, so to speak, and you're having these conversations, and you're advocating for yourself and you're advocating for your events program and your team, I think you have to be able to speak the same language as the rest of the people at the table, and you have to be able to understand what's their goal, at the end of the day. I've worked for stakeholders that have been very transactional, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, they want to see results, and here's how they want to see them, and your guidelines are very clear. So we bring that into every event that we do, and we make sure we're measuring ourselves against, the success that is in that person's eyes. I've worked with stakeholders that have been very hands-on in planning. And that's been a lot of fun too, because they bring a whole nother level of like creativity and, looking at things through a different lens. But maybe their thoughts and feelings about a successful event is more based on, feeling and experience than it is metrics. I think you just have to find the right balance, and really get to know people on a different level, like understand what it is that they want to see and be able to kind of anticipate that. That makes your job as an event professional a lot easier if you're able to kind of see what's coming.
So you just sort of touched on one of the questions I was leading into, which is, how you maintain that cross-functional relationship with stakeholders. Is there a particular example of a challenging cross-functional collaboration and how you managed that?
Well, I mean, I think just based out of experience, like I love talking to people, and I love, getting to hear their opinions about things and their take on things. And I think that helps me to kind of think about things a little bit differently when I'm starting to conceptualize an event and plan an event. But I think in my experience, what it's come down to when there are those challenging stakeholders that maybe you're not seeing eye to eye or you're not communicating in a way that's effective, I've learned, the briefing process is key. And when early on in my career, I was like, okay, like we talked about it, we can check that box, we're good, we can move on, we're all on the same page. But I've learned quickly that, come back to this visual deck or presentation or a sheet where we can all go and collaborate on, the idea behind the event. And we can come back to it time and time again. And, if somebody has a different opinion about, well, we wanted to do this within the event and these were our goals, we can all come back and say, okay, like here is, the sheet and the outline of what we wanted to accomplish. I think that effective communication is the most important thing when it comes to stakeholders. And like relationships can carry you, as far as they can, but really like it comes down to having an organized structure, being able to enforce that and being able to like come back to that and bring people back to that. Because events are exciting. Like people love to be a part of that, and they love to, flex their creative muscles a little bit and produce events and see, what we've all accomplished together. But, being able to kind of steadily lead people through that process and always, use that document or that outline as a guiding force. I think that's key to success.
Absolutely. So let's sort of shift into event strategy pivots, because we've been talking about pivot in the sense of your career and those massive changes and working with stakeholders. But, last minute changes are sometimes inevitable. We've just gone through, we just emerged from a period of the most dramatic pivot the entire industry is probably ever going to see. Can you describe a time when you had to pivot an event strategy last minute, and what was the situation and what was the outcome?
Yeah, sure. Well, we do these really amazing events here at ProducePay where we host customers for a weekend away in these grand resorts. So last year we decided to go to Chile at this winemaking facility. I think it's called Vina Vic. If you haven't been there, look it up. It's an amazing experience. And it was my first time to Chile. I've never been there before. I can listen and understand Spanish, but my speaking capabilities are very minimal. So there's one thing that you cannot control with events, and that's weather. So during this time that we were in Chile, it was a torrential downpour in the valley, in the growing region where we were hosting the event. Like it just completely flooded, and it was totally unexpected. It was like once in 100-year flood, and it completely destroyed the vineyard where we were going to go and have our networking event, to the point where the hotel had to close down and remove a group right before us mid-meeting, take them off property and relocate them somewhere else. So you can imagine my my fear and my frustration when they called me and said, "Hey, look, we might not be able to have your event at our hotel." Luckily, we stayed in close communication. We were able to pivot. And instead of taking the group to, a wine tasting experience down in the valley, we perched up on the side of a mountaintop and we brought in an external vendor and we did archery, which I was like, okay, how's this going to go? Like, I've never done archery before. And, I just imagined arrows kind of flying everywhere and, people getting hurt. But it actually turned out to be really amazing. People were getting competitive. People were on teams together. There was a sense of competition a little bit, and it was really fun. And that was the main goal and outcome that we wanted to achieve, is create this environment for people to network. And behind the scenes, like, nobody had any idea all of the chaos that we were facing with on the ground with the rain and the flooding. Like, they didn't know that we did this pivot at the last minute. And, it didn't impact our strategy that much because, we were able to accomplish the same thing with the networking. But again, like, I had to make sure that I was really communicating with our key stakeholder about, okay, you're going to show up here and it might not look the way that we thought it was going to look. But again, communication is key there, and being able to kind of anticipate what's coming. Build on your relationships with your vendors in the hotel. And it was an amazing experience at the end of the day.
Yeah. One of the key things that I took from that story is you went back to the objective, right? Like, it wasn't about the wine. It wasn't about shooting bows and arrows. It was about networking. It was about, that was the objective of the happening, of the event, of the purpose, why we were there. And the fact that nobody, like, I found it interesting that you pivoted from doing a wine tasting, which is about wine and food and having a glass in your hand and fancy cheeses and charcuterie boards, as my wife will, she has this like gigantic one that she brings out every once in a while. But to pivot to archery, which has nothing to do with drinking or eating. But it does hit the objective of getting people into a shared experience. I think that was very smart and an interesting way to see pivot. I think sometimes when we think of pivot, we think, oh, well, we can't do the wine tasting in the valley. Let's put it on the side of the mountain, but still do a wine tasting. I think that sometimes when people think of pivot, but the pivot point isn't the activity. The pivot point is the objective in that example. Is that a good way of putting it?
Yeah. And I think, when you do pivot, you compromise certain things. And you have to think about the attendee experience. Would it have been great to have the wine experience on top of the mountain? Sure, but they wouldn't have been able to walk through um, the winery and see, where the wine is made. And that's a big part of that experience. So we really thought hard about what we were going to sacrifice in making the pivot. And then at the end of the day, does it go back to our main goals and objectives, which it did.
So when faced with that sudden need to pivot an event strategy, so what are the key metrics that you're relying on to make that quick and effective decision?
Well, I think budget is definitely like the number one factor. Like, can we do it? Like, we always have an emergency, slush fund in our budget built in for situations like that. But also just, again, thinking about the attendee experience and what's the impact for them along the way? Is this going to create more of a transportation time for them or a little bit more inconvenience for them? Then we wouldn't sacrifice something like that. It has to be something that's, kind of undetectable from their seat, from their point of view, in my opinion, to make it a successful pivot and event.
So then when you're getting into that sudden pivot, what techniques do you use to ensure that everyone remains sort of focused and motivated despite the sudden change? I mean, that, as you just mentioned, the inconvenience, the change of venue, how are you, other than sort of detailing, here's the facts, right? Yeah. What communication techniques are you using to motivate those teams and the stakeholders to buy into it? Considering it's such a sudden and potentially dramatic pivot.
Yeah, I mean, I think it takes a unique individual to be on the back end and to be in events. And the team that I was working with at that time, they were so strong and they're problem solvers. They're a team of problem solvers. So when there is a challenge at hand, they're motivated and rewarded by being able to solve this problem and solve it quickly, and solve it without creating, a whole bunch of chaos behind the scenes. The key stakeholders, that's another one. that kind of gives me heart palpitations a little bit when I have to go to them and say, hey, look, last minute change, here we go. But I do try to just have them see the bigger picture when we're making these, decisions last minute. Okay, look, unfortunately we had to do X, Y, and Z, but we're still going to be able to do, ABC instead, or later, or tomorrow, or during the next event. And usually, it's a bigger deal to be in the event planner's position than it is to be in a key stakeholder in that, because we're handling people, we're moving them through transitions, we're making sure everyone's comfortable and happy and content. But they're not seeing what's going on and the legwork behind the scenes. I think it is very, very rewarding at the end of the event for the whole team working on the event. And we always collect feedback through surveys and whatnot, but just hearing people kind of talk about their experience during the event and seeing those scores on the survey and knowing even if there was a hiccup during the event, even if we had to pivot, people were still happy at the end of the day. We can add another element of surprise into the mix and delight people along the way, and that's kind of an artful distraction. We have this kind of unfortunate thing happen, but look over here, there's, a champagne tray for you, something like that.
So contingency planning is highlighted as an essential strategy for handling last minute changes. What role does contingency planning play in your overall strategy, and how do you ensure that those plans are robust enough to handle unexpected pivots?
Oh, this is a tough one. Well, do you mean when we're talking about contingency planning, do you mean as you're as based off of your overall event strategy, or just like for an event, like a specific event?
Yeah, I suppose I'm asking, like, adding contingency planning, like we all do this in the industry, right? We add contingency to budgets, we add sort of plan A, plan Bs, all of those kind of things. And I think my question is more around, so how stringent do we have to be about? Like, I don't think that in an example of changing an event from a wine tasting to archery, I don't think anybody had that as a plan B, right?
Right.
And so I suppose I'm asking, how much should we as event professionals be sort of storyboarding those plan Zs, right? Those like, what's the possibility of, and it's a risk management thing, I assume, but how well can we prepare for the fact that, what if the venue is hit by a meteorite tomorrow? Like, what do we have a plan for that?
Right.
I don't think we do, but should we be planning that kind of contingency? And how much of a contingency do you think event professionals should be preparing for before we sort of get into like a massive pivot?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you should let fear kind of own you and take control of your decision making. There are always things that are going to pop up and happen. And I think you do think about those ahead of time. Like, I'm a big visual person, and before an event, for weeks leading up to the event, I think about how it's going to go from start to finish, from people arriving and what are all the things that could happen along the way. I think that helps me to kind of think about the different scenarios and be able to think of a contingency plan. But I mean, I think we can talk about it, but honestly, it comes from experience. And my team at the time was very open to saying, okay, well, we did this in another environment, and this is how we solved this in a different scenario. Again, it's what we were talking about before, like diverse experiences and bringing in your skill set from other facets of your journey and your career, and being able to apply those. Like, I feel very lucky that I did have the hospitality background that I had, because I can jump in there and I can help, bust tables if I need to, or, talk to the head chef of the restaurant that we're at and speak that same language with them. I think, you think about it, you pull your other experiences from the past into contingency planning, but I don't think you should let that fear kind of control you. And when you're thinking about an event, it's easier to control that and to think about, well, what would my plan be specifically for this event? When you're thinking about it at a higher level, at a strategy level, like, it's a little bit harder to kind of predict and anticipate what's going to happen with our event strategy if the company jumps from, objective A to objective D that wasn't even on the map before. But I think as long as you have a strong foundation, again, surrounding yourself with a strong team that has that diverse experience, like, you're able to do a lot more than you think you can if you're not leading from a fearful place, for sure.
Absolutely. So as we sort of wrap up, the last sort of thing I want to check on is, some emerging trends that may cause pivots. Like, not that I think that you have a crystal ball. I don't think anybody in this industry does. We just sort of watch trends and try to predict the future as much as possible. But I'll ask you which trend you believe will significantly impact the events industry in the next 2 to 3 years, and how do you think, as an event professional, do we start preparing for that sort of emerging trend?
Yeah. I mean, I'm like everybody else right now, I'm fascinated with AI. Like, I think when AI first came out, I was like, oh, what is this kind of scary new technology? I don't want to touch it. I don't want to know about it. Again, like, letting that fear kind of bubble up and stay away from it. But AI can be a great tool, like, if you're using it responsibly, and if at face value what that's bringing to the table. I think it's a great tool for agendas or itineraries, just having that extra thinking and crowdsourcing for what are other people doing? It's pulling a lot of information from different places that can be helpful to us in agendas and session planning and, all that kind of stuff. I'm interested to see how that's incorporated into trade shows. Like, I love trade shows. I think they're great, but I think it's time that we're like ready for a refresh for trade shows. They could be a little stale, especially when you've been going to the same trade shows year after year. I think it's a great way for you as an event organizer to show up differently. Like, don't be afraid to take a risk and use something like AI in your trade show booth. How you would do that, I don't know yet, but it's definitely something that I'm interested in learning a lot more about. And I think it's going to become a lot more popular within the industry in the next couple of years, for sure.
Yeah, I still go back to that idea that there's a meme that goes around, and it's a graphic designer from some firm, whatever, who was posted on LinkedIn that said, "Oh, look, I was looking forward to AI doing the dishes and cleaning my house so that I could do the art, not the other way around." Right.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about it this morning on the way in. I'm thinking, I was listening to something about AI, and I was like, yeah, isn't it supposed to be robots who are like coiling cable and stuff like that so that I don't have to do it? But now it's, AI is like designing stages for us. And I was like, man, I don't want to do that. I want to design the stage. So finally, knowing that there's a lot of event professionals and listening to this podcast, we always like to end the episode with a bit of practical advice and or an immediate step that a listener can take to building that muscle that allows them to pivot well. Like, if somebody's listening right now, what would you tell them would be that practical first step that they should do to get better at pivoting or being better prepared for pivoting?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very foundational, but just do something that scares you a little bit. Get comfortable in that fear. I really don't like public speaking. I don't like, being on camera, but I said to myself when you invited me onto this podcast that, okay, well, this is something that scares me. I'm going to get uncomfortable with it, and I'm going to do it so that I know how that feels, and it's not going to be fearful for me in the future to do that. I think it's really basic. You just have to, it's really basic in the sense that you have to just kind of face fear head on, do things that, make you uncomfortable, do things that you don't think you can do. And the more that you kind of have those experiences, you'll be able to quiet that fear a little bit more and be able to accomplish things that you never thought you could do. Like, that's the art of pivoting, is taking a risk and it working out, but also having, a strong knowledge and anticipation of what's coming. So yeah, I think it starts with yourself, definitely.
Well, thank you, Ryanne, for joining me on the podcast today. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you after this episode?
I would say LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me. Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, is brought to you by Byrne Production Services. To find out more about Byrne Production Services and how putting on events can drive value for your business, visit byrneproductionservices.com. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Production Value Matters, thank you so much for listening.